Jasmine was 30 seconds from ending her shift at Eddie's Diner when the afternoon thunderstorm transformed Philadelphia's streets into glistening rivers. The rain pelted against the windows with relentless determination, as if personally offended by her plans to leave. She lingered by the entrance, watching sheets of water cascade from awnings while half-heartedly wiping down menus. Her thin uniform offered little protection against the deluge that separated her from the bus stop 5 blocks away. The bell above the door chimed as a well-dressed businessman entered, shaking droplets from an umbrella that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. He surveyed the empty diner without ordering, then returned to the sleek black Rolls-Royce idling at the curb. A flash of pink caught Jasmine's eye through the rain-streaked window, a small figure in a bright raincoat standing frozen at the intersection. The child couldn't have been more than 6, clutching a stuffed rabbit against her chest with white-knuckled determination. Without hesitation, Jasmine grabbed the diner's oversized umbrella and rushed into the downpour. The rain immediately assaulted her, cold droplets sneaking past her collar, but her focus remained on the little girl, whose solemn eyes were now fixed on her approach. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" she called over the storm's rumble, crouching to meet the child's eye level. The girl nodded almost imperceptibly, her bottom lip quivering with the effort not to cry. The child's patent leather shoes gleamed despite the weather, her clothes unmistakably expensive beneath the designer raincoat. Jasmine scanned the street for frantic parents, finding only impatient drivers and the idling Rolls-Royce with its tinted windows. "My daddy is waiting," the little girl finally whispered, pointing a trembling finger toward the opposite corner, where the Philadelphia Museum of Art loomed against darkening clouds. Her voice carried the slightest trace of an accent Jasmine couldn't place. Jasmine hesitated, years of warnings about stranger danger battling with the reality of a terrified child in a storm. The girl's pleading eyes made the decision for her. She couldn't abandon this child to the elements and rushing traffic. She took the small, cold hand in hers and carefully guided them across when the light changed. The little girl walked with perfect posture despite her obvious fear, as if deportment lessons had been drilled into her since infancy. The museum steps loomed empty ahead, no anxious father in sight, only the persistent rain drumming against marble. Confusion creased Jasmine's brow as she scanned the deserted entrance, wondering if she had misunderstood the child's directions. "He's watching," the girl said cryptically, suddenly calm, as she pointed toward the Rolls-Royce that had mysteriously relocated to the museum's circular drive. The tinted window lowered just enough to reveal a masculine hand beckoning them forward. The museum guard stepped forward as they approached, his face transforming from professional concern to deferential respect upon seeing the child. "Miss Harper, your father has been worried," he said with a slight bow that seemed absurdly formal to Jasmine. The rear door of the Rolls-Royce swung open, revealing a cavernous interior of buttery leather. Harper dropped Jasmine's hand and climbed inside with practiced ease, leaving Jasmine standing awkwardly in the rain, uncertain whether to leave or wait. "Please join us," came a deep voice from within the luxury vehicle. Not a request, but a command. The face remained in shadow, but Jasmine felt the weight of his gaze as she stood dripping on the pavement, unaware that this moment would irrevocably alter her ordinary life. The interior of the Rolls-Royce enveloped Jasmine like another world, the scent of expensive cologne and leather replacing the familiar grease and coffee of Eddie's Diner. Little Harper sat primly beside a man whose features seemed carved from stone, all sharp angles and cold perfection. "Thank you for assisting my daughter," he said, his voice carrying the same subtle accent as the child's, though roughened by what Jasmine imagined were expensive cigars and aged whiskey. His eyes, nearly black in the dim light, assessed her with unnerving precision. Harper clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, looking between Jasmine and her father with curious intensity. "She wasn't afraid of the cars like I was," the girl offered, her voice small but clear in the cocoon of luxury. "Jackson Ford," the man introduced himself with a slight nod that somehow conveyed both gratitude and dismissal. No handshake was offered, and Jasmine found herself grateful to avoid touching this man who radiated power like a physical force. The driver navigated Philadelphia's rain-slicked streets with practiced ease, passing through neighborhoods Jasmine recognized before turning into areas where old money whispered from behind wrought iron gates. No one spoke as the car glided through increasingly exclusive streets. "My daughter's nanny abandoned her responsibility today," Ford finally said, breaking the silence that had begun to feel suffocating. His tone remained conversational, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes when he mentioned the absent caretaker. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably on the leather seat, suddenly aware of her soaked uniform and the growing puddle beneath her worn sneakers. She opened her mouth to say it was no trouble, then closed it when Ford raised his hand slightly. "You work at that diner," he stated, rather than asked. "Eddie's, isn't it? For how long?" His questions felt less like casual conversation and more like an interrogation disguised as small talk. 3 years, Jasmine answered, fighting the urge to elaborate or apologize for her modest employment. College tuition didn't pay itself, and tips at Eddie's were reliable if never substantial. "And you're studying," he prompted, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Harper watched their exchange with the focused attention of a child accustomed to learning through observation. "Early childhood education," Jasmine replied, wondering how soon she could politely ask to be dropped at a bus stop. The rain still pounded against the windows, but the weather seemed less threatening than the growing realization that this man knew more about her than he should. The car slowed to a stop in front of her apartment building, a location she was certain she hadn't provided. Ford reached into his suit jacket and withdrew an envelope that he handed to her with manicured fingers, adorned by a single gold signet ring. "A token of appreciation," he said, as the door beside her opened automatically, held by the driver who had materialized beside the car with an umbrella. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, too substantial to contain a simple thank you note. When Jasmine opened the envelope in her tiny studio apartment, she found 10 crisp $100 bills and a business card bearing only a phone number embossed in gold. No name, no company, just 10 digits that seemed to pulse with possibility in her trembling fingers. The money solved immediate problems: overdue rent, textbooks for next semester, the dental appointment she'd been postponing, but the card presented a question that kept her awake long after midnight. Why would a man who clearly commanded enormous wealth and influence want her to call? 3 days passed before curiosity overcame caution, and Jasmine dialed the number on the gold-embossed card. The phone rang exactly twice before a woman with a clipped, efficient voice answered with neither greeting nor company name. "I'm calling about Mr. Ford," Jasmine said uncertainly, immediately feeling foolish for not preparing a more specific explanation. Her fingers twisted nervously in the cord of her landline, a relic left by the previous tenant. "Miss Jasmine Carter," the woman replied, not a question but confirmation. "A car will collect you tomorrow at 6. Dress appropriately." The line went dead before Jasmine could ask what appropriately meant for a destination she didn't know. The black car that arrived wasn't the Rolls-Royce, but something equally imposing, driven by a man whose suit jacket couldn't quite conceal the bulge of what Jasmine was almost certain was a shoulder holster. He opened her door without speaking, his eyes constantly scanning the street. They drove to Rittenhouse Square, Philadelphia's most exclusive address, stopping before an imposing limestone mansion set back from the street behind ornate iron gates. Jasmine's simple black dress, her only formal attire, suddenly felt woefully inadequate. The door opened before she reached it, revealing an older woman in what appeared to be a housekeeper's uniform, though more elegantly tailored than any Jasmine had seen. "Miss Carter, Mr. Ford is expecting you in the library," she said, gesturing toward a hallway lined with artwork. The house was a study in tasteful opulence. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that belonged in museums rather than private residences. Yet children's drawings hung in gilded frames alongside Renaissance paintings, creating a strange dissonance. Jackson Ford stood as she entered the library, a room that smelled of leather-bound books and history. "Jasmine," he said, her name sounding different in his accent, almost musical. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "I was curious," she admitted, accepting the seat he gestured toward, but declining the offered drink. The library felt like a stage set for a conversation whose script she hadn't received, every leather chair and crystal decanter arranged with deliberate precision. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere upstairs, followed by the patter of running feet. Ford's expression softened almost imperceptibly at the sound, revealing a glimpse of the father beneath the intimidating exterior. "My daughter has asked about you every day," he said, studying Jasmine with that same unsettling intensity she remembered from the car. "She seems quite taken with her rescuer from the storm." Jasmine shifted under his gaze, unsure whether this explained the invitation or merely prefaced its true purpose. "Harper seems like a wonderful child," she offered, neutrally polite while wondering what this man really wanted from her. "Her mother is no longer with us," Ford stated abruptly, the words precise and carefully emotionless. She has had 3 nannies in the past year, none suitable for various reasons. The most recent demonstrated her incompetence quite thoroughly by abandoning my daughter in a storm. Understanding dawned with a clarity that momentarily silenced Jasmine's carefully prepared explanations about why she couldn't possibly be involved in whatever proposition was forthcoming. He wasn't looking for gratitude. He was conducting a job interview. "I'm still completing my degree," she began, but Ford waved away her protest with a dismissive gesture that suggested academic schedules were trivial obstacles easily overcome by men of his position and resources. The arrangement was finalized over breakfast the following morning. Jasmine would move into the East Wing guest suite and become Harper's live-in caretaker while completing her degree. Ford's offer included tuition coverage, a salary that made her previous earnings seem like pocket change, and use of the family's second car. "Daddy, is she staying with us forever?" Harper appeared in the doorway of the breakfast room, still in pajamas adorned with cartoon ballerinas. Her dark hair hung in sleep-tangled curls around a face that lit up upon seeing Jasmine. Recognition flashed in the child's eyes, not mere recollection of their rainy encounter, but something deeper, as if Harper had been waiting for Jasmine long before the storm brought them together. The intensity of the connection was unsettling yet undeniable. Harper insisted on showing Jasmine her bedroom personally, leading her by the hand through corridors that felt more like a museum than a home. The child's room contrasted sharply with the mansion's formal elegance. Walls painted soft pink, shelves overflowing with books and stuffed animals. "My mom used to read to me every night," Harper confided, climbing onto her canopied bed and retrieving a worn copy of The Little Prince from beneath her pillow. The book's spine was cracked from frequent readings, its pages soft with handling. Jasmine settled beside Harper as the girl opened to a dog-eared page about the fox who wished to be tamed. "Your voice sounds like hers," Harper whispered, leaning trustingly against Jasmine's shoulder as if they'd shared bedtime stories for years. By the 3rd evening, they had established a routine: bath time followed by hair brushing, and precisely 2 stories before lights out. Harper's nightmares, which Ford had mentioned with clinical detachment during their initial meeting, hadn't materialized since Jasmine's arrival. "You're good for her," Ford observed from the doorway, as Jasmine tucked Harper in after a particularly convincing rendition of The 3 Little Pigs. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture had softened. The perpetual tension in his shoulders momentarily eased. Jasmine began to notice other staff watching her interactions with Harper, their expressions varying from approval to suspicion. The security personnel, ever present but nearly invisible, seemed particularly attentive to her movements throughout the mansion. "Miss Grace lasted only 2 weeks, confided Marjorie, the elderly housekeeper, as she helped Jasmine locate art supplies for a project with Harper. "The one before her, not even a month. You've got something special with that child. Don't squander it." Harper thrived under Jasmine's care, her formerly solemn demeanor gradually yielding to genuine childish exuberance. She asked endless questions, absorbed information like a sponge, and began expressing interests beyond the rigid educational schedule Ford had established. Their trip to the Franklin Institute marked Harper's first visit to a public space without her father's security detail hovering visibly nearby. Jasmine watched in wonder as the girl raced from exhibit to exhibit, her laughter echoing through the Science Museum's cavernous halls. "I want you to be my new mommy," Harper announced over ice cream cones afterward, her matter-of-fact delivery belying the emotional weight of her words. Chocolate dripped unnoticed down her fingers as she awaited Jasmine's response with unwavering expectation. Ford was uncharacteristically present for dinner that evening, joining them at the smaller family table in the breakfast room, rather than working through the meal as had become his habit. He listened attentively as Harper recounted every detail of their museum adventure. "Perhaps you'd consider making your position more permanent," he suggested, after Harper had been tucked in, his proposal hanging in the air between them like a fragile thing. The formality that usually characterized his speech had slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath his controlled exterior. Jasmine's friends from her previous life barely recognized the transformation 6 weeks had wrought, not just in her designer clothes or the luxury car she now drove, but in the quiet confidence she carried. The mansion had become home with surprising ease, her tiny apartment already sublet to a grateful classmate. Late-night conversations with Ford became a ritual after Harper's bedtime, intellectual discussions that ranged from philosophy to politics, revealing a mind far more nuanced than his businessman persona suggested. He listened to her opinions with genuine interest, challenging her thinking without dismissing her perspectives. "My family came from nothing," he confided one evening, swirling aged scotch in a crystal tumbler as firelight cast dramatic shadows across his features. "Everything I've built, I built for Harper, to ensure she never knows the hunger I knew as a child." The household staff treated Jasmine with increasing deference as her position evolved from employee to something less defined but undeniably more significant. Even Martinez, the taciturn head of security, began acknowledging her with respectful nods in hallways once forbidden to her. Glimpses of Ford's business associates offered puzzling contradictions. Politicians dining in the formal room one evening, men with hard eyes and concealed weapons conferring in hushed tones in the study the next. Jasmine learned to navigate these encounters with diplomatic grace, shepherding Harper away when conversations grew tense. "Some of my associates lack certain social refinements," Ford explained dismissively when she questioned the armed men who arrived past midnight. His tone discouraged further inquiry, though his eyes held something that might have been apology. Harper's 6th birthday celebration transformed the austere mansion into a fairy tale kingdom, complete with a carousel on the back lawn and a cake taller than the birthday girl herself. Guests arrived in chauffeur-driven cars, bearing gifts that reflected both ostentatious wealth and careful consideration. "You've made her happy," Mrs. Petrov, an elegant older woman Jasmine understood to be Harper's godmother, observed as they watched the child delight in her presence. Jackson, too, though he'd sooner cut out his tongue than admit it. The locked room in the East Wing remained the mansion's only forbidden territory, its heavy oak door secured by both electronic keypad and traditional lock. Harper avoided even walking past it, her usual chatter falling silent whenever their path took them down that corridor. Jasmine discovered Ford's private art collection quite by accident, taking a wrong turn while searching for Harper's misplaced stuffed rabbit. The gallery occupied a converted ballroom, its walls adorned with paintings whose collective value likely exceeded the GDP of small nations. "My wife was the collector," Ford said, startling Jasmine from her admiration of a particularly striking Modigliani. He stood in the doorway, jacket removed and tie loosened, the most informal she had ever seen him outside their late-night conversations. Ford crossed the room with deliberate steps, stopping beside a portrait of a woman whose resemblance to Harper was unmistakable. The same solemn eyes and delicate features, though the woman's expression held a worldliness the child had yet to develop. "Anastasia preferred artists with troubled souls," he added softly. "She was beautiful," Jasmine offered, sensing the complex grief that radiated from him as he gazed at his late wife's image. The portrait captured both fragility and fierce intelligence, qualities Harper had clearly inherited along with her mother's striking looks. Her hand found his without conscious intent, fingers intertwining in a gesture of comfort that crossed the carefully maintained boundaries between them. Ford's grip tightened briefly before he released her. The momentary vulnerability shuddered behind his usual composed facade. "We should return to Harper," he said, voice restored to its customary controlled cadence. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of connection that neither could comfortably name, yet neither wished to deny. The first indication that Ford's business extended beyond legitimate enterprise came in fragments of overheard phone conversations, terse instructions about shipments and oblique references to competitors encroaching on territories. His voice during these calls transformed, the cultured accent giving way to something harder, more commanding. "The Bratva won't wait," a visitor with a thick Russian accent insisted one afternoon, when Jasmine accidentally interrupted a meeting in the study. The tension in the room dissipated into artificial pleasantries at her appearance, but the visitor's slip, mentioning the Russian Brotherhood, lingered in her thoughts. Harper's nightmares returned with sudden ferocity after months of peaceful sleep, her screams echoing through the mansion's hallways shortly after midnight. "The bad men are coming," she sobbed against Jasmine's shoulder, small body trembling with terror that no amount of reassurance could soothe. Ford's reaction to his daughter's resurgent fears was immediate and alarming. Security doubled overnight, with armed men patrolling the grounds and cameras installed in previously unmonitored areas. His expression when he believed himself unobserved revealed a calculating fury that chilled Jasmine's blood. "The Moreno family is making their move," Jasmine overheard Martinez reporting in the study. The door left ajar just enough for voices to carry into the hallway. "They believe you've grown soft since Harper's mother died, that the American woman has made you vulnerable." Philadelphia's morning newspaper delivered the truth Jasmine had been subconsciously avoiding. Shipping magnate Jackson Ford questioned in connection with organized crime. the headline proclaimed above a photo of Ford leaving the federal building flanked by attorneys in expensive suits. "I need you to take Harper to the lake house," Ford instructed that evening, his composure intact, though his eyes betrayed bone-deep exhaustion. "Martinez will drive you tonight after dark. Tell no one where you're going, not even the household staff." The practical duffel bag that appeared in Jasmine's suite contained not clothes, but stacks of cash, 3 different passports with her photo, but unfamiliar names, and a handgun nestled in a side pocket. The sight of the weapon made her stomach lurch, concrete evidence that the danger wasn't merely theoretical. Harper accepted the midnight departure with the resignation of a child accustomed to sudden disruptions, clutching her stuffed rabbit and favorite book, as Martinez loaded their luggage into an unmarked SUV with tinted windows. "Will Daddy come soon?" she asked, voice small in the cavernous garage. The lake house proved to be a misnomer. The isolated compound was more fortress than vacation retreat, its picturesque exterior concealing reinforced walls and security systems that would have impressed military installations. Martinez gave Jasmine a crash course in the panic room protocols before departing for Philadelphia. 3 days passed in tense isolation, Harper's resilience gradually reasserting itself as they settled into a routine of board games and nature walks within the property's fenced boundaries. Jasmine checked the secure phone hourly, awaiting word from Ford, while keeping her anxiety hidden from the child. "You don't seem scared," Harper observed as they baked cookies in the industrial-grade kitchen, her small hands carefully measuring flour into a bowl. "Mommy was always scared when we had to go away like this." The rival family's threat materialized at dusk on the 4th day, headlights cutting through the trees as 3 vehicles approached along the private road, moving too fast for casual visitors. Jasmine activated the security protocols with trembling fingers, herding Harper toward the panic room as instructed. "We have to be very quiet now," she whispered, as the reinforced door sealed them inside the hidden chamber, its walls lined with monitors displaying camera feeds from around the property. Harper nodded solemnly, settling into the routine of a scenario she had clearly experienced before. The intruders moved with military precision, systematically breaching the house's outer defenses, while speaking rapid-fire Spanish into communication devices. Jasmine counted 6 men, all armed, all focused on finding something, or someone, with single-minded determination that made her blood run cold. The panic room's communication system beeped with an incoming call, just as the intruders breached the main entrance. Ford's face appeared on the monitor, his composed expression belying the chaos visible in the background of what appeared to be his study in Philadelphia. "They found you faster than anticipated," he said, eyes darting to Harper, who pressed herself against the screen at the sound of her father's voice. "Reinforcements are 20 minutes out, but you need to move before they locate the panic room." Jasmine's journalism professor would appreciate the irony. Her abandoned minor was proving unexpectedly useful as headlines about Ford flashed through her memory. Philadelphia crime families, Russian mafia territories, Bratva lieutenant escapes federal custody, pieces falling into terrible alignment. "You're not just a businessman," she stated flatly, one arm protectively around Harper, while her free hand hovered over the panic room's internal arsenal. The revelation felt simultaneously shocking and obvious, like a truth her subconscious had recognized long before her rational mind acknowledged it. Ford's expression shifted from urgency to resignation, the carefully cultivated facade of legitimacy crumbling under the weight of circumstance. "I've been many things: businessman, immigrant, survivor. But right now, I'm just a father asking you to protect what matters most." The secret passage behind the panic room's rear wall opened to a tunnel that smelled of damp earth and recent construction. Harper moved through the darkness with practiced ease, her small hand gripping Jasmine's with surprising strength as they navigated the narrow passage toward an exit half a mile from the main house. "Mommy and I used this when the bad men came before," Harper whispered, her matter-of-fact tone more chilling than any fear would have been. The tunnel eventually opened into a small clearing, where an unassuming sedan waited, keys hidden in the wheel well as Ford had instructed. The morning newspaper at their motel outside Pittsburgh confirmed Jasmine's worst fears. "Suspected mob boss, Ford eludes federal custody," screamed the headline above a photo, showing the mansion's gates riddled with bullet holes. The article detailed allegations of racketeering, money laundering, and connections to the Russian mafia dating back decades. "Is Daddy a bad man?" Harper asked, her small face solemn as she studied the newspaper Jasmine had failed to hide quickly enough. The question contained multitudes, moral complexity far beyond her 6 years, yet perfectly distilled to the essence of their situation. Jasmine chose her words carefully, aware that this moment might shape Harper's understanding of her father forever. Your daddy has made some bad choices, but he loves you more than anything in this world. That part is absolutely true. The burner phone Ford had hidden in the car chirped with coordinates for a rendezvous point near the Ohio border. Jasmine hesitated, finger hovering over the response button, the weight of her next decision pressing on her chest with physical force. Every rational thought screamed for her to contact authorities, to extricate herself and possibly Harper from a situation rapidly spiraling beyond comprehension. Yet the memory of Ford's expression when he spoke of keeping his daughter safe resonated with something fundamental in her own heart. They reached the abandoned factory as sunset painted the sky in violent oranges and reds, a fitting backdrop for the confrontation Jasmine knew awaited inside. Harper had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhaustion finally overcoming the adrenaline that had sustained her through their flight. The interior of the factory resembled a war room, with maps spread across makeshift tables and armed men monitoring communications equipment. Ford stood at the center, issuing orders with the natural authority of someone born to command, his designer suit exchanged for tactical gear. His expression when he caught sight of Jasmine carrying his sleeping daughter contained multitudes, relief, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had dared name in the quiet evenings by the library fire. The hardened men around him fell silent, parting to create a path between them. "You came," Ford said simply, reaching for Harper with hands that trembled slightly despite his composed facade. The sleeping child transferred to her father's arms without waking, instinctively nestling against his chest as if sensing safety even in slumber. "Not for you," Jasmine clarified, though the declaration lacked conviction even to her own ears. The past 24 hours had stripped away pretenses, leaving raw truth exposed like nerve endings. Her attachment to Harper, her complicated feelings for Ford, her own moral compass spinning wildly. Ford nodded, accepting both her presence and her distance as he carried Harper to a small room that had been prepared with military precision. Cot made with hospital corners, stuffed rabbit positioned on the pillow, copy of The Little Prince on a makeshift bedside table. "The Moreno cartel believes taking Harper will force me to surrender territory along the eastern seaboard," Ford explained once his daughter was settled. His voice held the clinical detachment of someone dissociating from unbearable stakes, though his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. Martinez appeared from the shadows, his usually impassive face marked by a fresh cut across one cheekbone. "Perimeter sensors detected movement in the northwest quadrant," he reported, gaze flickering briefly to Jasmine before returning to his boss with professional focus. Ford's transformation was immediate and chilling. The devoted father vanished behind the mask of a man who commanded fear through earned reputation. "Defensive positions," he ordered, voice dropping to a register Jasmine had never heard before. "You should be with Harper," he told Jasmine, pressing a small handgun into her palm despite her instinctive recoil. "The safety is off. Aim center mass, and don't hesitate. These men won't show mercy because you're a woman." The first explosion rocked the building's foundation, concrete dust raining from the ceiling as emergency lights bathed everything in eerie red glow. Harper woke with a startled cry that pierced through the chaos, her terrified voice calling for Jasmine rather than her father. Jasmine gathered the child into her arms, whispering reassurances that felt hollow against the backdrop of gunfire echoing through the abandoned factory. Harper's small body trembled against hers, face buried against her neck to block out the violence erupting around them. The door splintered inward as 2 armed men burst into the makeshift bedroom, their expressions changing from determined to triumphant at the sight of Harper. Jasmine reacted without conscious thought, placing herself between the intruders and the child, with the gun raised just as Ford had demonstrated. Through the broken door, Jasmine could see more men moving in the hallway, their shadows stretching like dark omens against the emergency lighting. Time seemed to slow as adrenaline flooded her system, her college self, who once stressed over midterm deadlines, now entirely replaced by this new version ready to kill for a child not biologically hers. The weight of the gun steadied her somehow, its cold metal a stark contrast to Harper's warm hand, clutching the back of her shirt. The little girl whispered something in Russian, a prayer perhaps, taught by her father or remembered from her mother, the foreign syllables adding an eerie soundtrack to the standoff. A crash from elsewhere in the building momentarily distracted the second intruder, his eyes flickering toward the sound, a tactical error that revealed his inexperience compared to his partner. Jasmine cataloged this weakness instinctively, Ford's lessons on assessing threats surfacing in her mind with surprising clarity. "American women don't shoot," the taller man sneered in accented English, advancing with casual confidence that suggested he'd encountered many such empty threats before. His companion circled to approach from the side, tactical training evident in his coordinated movements. The gunshot surprised everyone, most of all Jasmine, who felt the weapon kick in her hands before registering that she had pulled the trigger. The taller man crumpled with an expression of almost comical disbelief, clutching his shoulder where crimson bloomed against dark fabric. His companion's hesitation lasted precisely 2 seconds, long enough for Ford to appear in the doorway like an avenging angel, his own weapon making efficient work of the threat with mechanical precision. Blood sprayed across the concrete floor in a grotesque abstract pattern that would haunt Jasmine's dreams for years to come. "We need to move," Ford stated, practical in crisis as he gathered essential items into a backpack while avoiding Jasmine's stunned gaze. They breached the northern entrance, but Martinez has a vehicle waiting in the loading dock. The journey through the factory's labyrinthine corridors unfolded in surreal slow motion, Harper's weight growing heavier in Jasmine's arms as they navigated around evidence of brutal conflict. Ford moved ahead of them, weapon ready, occasionally exchanging curt communications through his earpiece. Daylight pierced the gloom as they reached the loading dock where Martinez waited beside a nondescript van, engine running. The momentary relief shattered as a single shot rang out, catching Ford in the side and spinning him against the concrete wall with sickening force. 6 months after the shootout at the abandoned factory, Jasmine sat beside Ford's hospital bed, reading aloud from The Little Prince. Harper had fallen asleep across her father's legs, one small hand maintaining contact with him even in slumber, as if reassuring herself of his continued presence. The monitors beeped steadily, marking improvement in vital signs that doctors had initially declared hopeless when Ford arrived with a bullet lodged dangerously close to his spine. His recovery defied medical predictions, with the same stubborn determination that characterized everything he did. "You should have taken her and run," Ford said, voice still raspy from prolonged intubation as he stroked Harper's dark hair with gentle fingers. The gesture belied the ruthless efficiency Jasmine had witnessed during their escape, his wounded body continuing to function through sheer willpower until they reached safety. Federal witness protection had transformed their identities, with meticulous attention to detail, new names, backgrounds, documentation that withstood scrutiny. Jackson Ford was legally dead, his empire dismantled through testimony that crippled both the Bratva's American operations and the Moreno cartel's Eastern distribution network. "They'll never stop looking," Martinez had warned during his final visit, before disappearing to begin his own new life. His normally stoic expression had softened briefly when Harper hugged him goodbye, revealing the humanity beneath the professional exterior Jasmine had once found intimidating. Their modest suburban home in a quiet Midwest town represented everything the mansion in Philadelphia had not been. Warm, unassuming, designed for comfort rather than impression. Neighbors knew them as widower Michael Bennett recovering from a car accident, his daughter Zoe, and his fiancée Rebecca, who had recently started teaching at the local elementary school. The wedding ring on Jasmine's finger still felt foreign sometimes, catching sunlight in unexpected moments as she helped Harper with homework or prepared dinner in their kitchen. The legal ceremony had been performed for practical purposes of their cover story, but the commitment it represented had evolved into something genuine. "The Bennetts invited us for barbecue this weekend," Jasmine mentioned as Ford, now Michael, shifted to a sitting position with careful movements. Physical therapy had restored much of his mobility, though he would always carry a slight limp as reminder of his former life's cost. Harper stirred at their voices, blinking sleep from eyes that remained the most expressive feature in her increasingly mature face. "Can I bring my new science project to show Katie?" she asked, referring to the neighbor's daughter who had quickly become her closest friend. The normality of the request struck Jasmine with unexpected force. This child who had once navigated panic rooms and escape tunnels now worried about impressing peers with a solar system model. The resilience of children continued to amaze her, reinforcing her decision to complete her teaching certification despite their complicated circumstances. "Your project puts NASA to shame," Ford assured Harper, with the gentle teasing that had become more frequent as pain medications decreased and his natural personality re-emerged. The man who had commanded criminal enterprises with ruthless efficiency had proven surprisingly adept at helping construct Neptune's rings from glitter and cardboard. Their nightly routine had evolved into a sacred ritual: dinner together regardless of circumstances, homework at the kitchen table, reading before bedtime. Ford insisted on normalcy with the same intensity he had once applied to security protocols, determined to provide Harper the childhood his own circumstances had denied him. "I received a letter from Mrs. Petroff," Ford mentioned after Harper had bounded upstairs to call Katie about weekend plans. He extracted a carefully folded paper from his pocket, handwritten in elegant Cyrillic that Jasmine had learned to recognize if not read during their months together. The older woman had been the only connection maintained from their previous life, her loyalty secured through decades of complex history Ford had gradually revealed during his recovery. She served as both conduit for necessary information and living reminder that their past had contained genuine relationships among the danger. "She believes the remaining Moreno lieutenants have accepted fabricated evidence of our deaths in a boating accident off the Carolina coast," he continued, satisfaction evident in his tone. Security remained an underlying concern, despite their peaceful present circumstances. Contingency plans maintained even as they established roots in their new community. The transformation in Ford himself represented perhaps the most remarkable evolution, the ruthless crime boss gradually yielding to the father and partner who had always existed beneath layers of necessary hardness. Jasmine sometimes caught glimpses of his former self when unexpected noises triggered vigilance, or when business news mentioned organizations he had once controlled. Their bedroom conversations often turned to the future, possibilities that would have seemed impossible during those blood-soaked hours in the abandoned factory. Ford spoke of Harper's education, of perhaps expanding their family someday, his voice softening when he admitted his hope that their children would never know the weight of his past sins. Jasmine had enrolled in trauma counseling courses, determined to help Harper process experiences no child should endure. The nightmares had decreased in frequency but still came occasionally, sending both adults rushing to her bedside where they would find her building fortifications from pillows and stuffed animals, protective instincts manifesting even in sleep. The small garden behind their house had become Jasmine's personal project, each plant symbolizing their new beginning, roots establishing themselves in soil far removed from Philadelphia's dangers. Ford often watched from the patio as she and Harper tended the growing things, his expression reflecting wonder at this simple domestic peace he'd never believed possible for himself. Their future remained unwritten, witness protection identities offering both security and limitation, former skills applied to legitimate enterprises, constant awareness balanced against determined normalcy. The moral complexity of loving a man with blood on his hands had resolved into acceptance of human capacity for both darkness and redemption. "I don't regret it," Jasmine said quietly, answering the question Ford still asked with his eyes if not his voice. Not the rain that day, not the choice to help Harper cross the street, not even the shot I fired to protect her. Every decision led here, and here is where I choose to be. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.